The entire coffee shop went silent when I spilled my drink all over Sebastian Moretti's custom black suit. Every head turned. A woman near the counter gasped. Even the barista stopped moving. Because everyone in the city knew who he was. The powerful boss nobody dared challenge. His bodyguard took a step forward. The room waited for me to apologize. Instead, I looked straight into Sebastian's cold gray-blue eyes and said, "I am not afraid of you." The silence somehow became even louder. For a second, nobody breathed. Not even me. Sebastian stared at me as if I had spoken a language he had never heard before. Then something unexpected happened. He smiled. Not because he was amused. Because he was confused. Nobody talked to him like that. Nobody refused to fear him. I grabbed my bag and walked out into the rain. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, Sebastian discovered I worked 2 jobs. He discovered I lived in a tiny apartment. He discovered I spent my free time helping people who could never repay me. Every time he expected me to ask for money, I refused. Every time he expected me to be impressed by his power, I ignored it. Then one night, he watched me give my last $20 to a struggling family outside a community kitchen. That was the moment everything changed. Because while Sebastian was fighting to protect a business empire worth millions, I was trying to help people survive another day. And for the first time in years, the powerful boss began questioning the life he had built. But when a crisis threatened to destroy everything he owned, Sebastian faced an impossible choice. Save his reputation. Or save innocent people. And the decision he made shocked the entire city. The fastest way to surprise a powerful man is to stop being afraid of him. I did not know that on the rainy Tuesday afternoon when my life collided with Sebastian Moretti's. At the time, I was just trying to make it through another exhausting day. My shift at the community kitchen had ended an hour late. My sneakers were soaked from the rain. My bank account had less than $40 in it. And I was carrying 2 paper cups of coffee because my second job started in 20 minutes. New York moved around me in a blur of umbrellas and taxi horns. People rushed down the sidewalk with their heads lowered against the weather. Nobody paid attention to anyone else. That was normal. In a city this big, most people became invisible. I certainly felt invisible. Then I turned a corner too quickly. My shoulder slammed into someone. One of the coffee cups slipped from my hand. Hot coffee splashed across a perfectly tailored black suit. The world seemed to stop. I stared at the stain spreading across the expensive fabric. Then I slowly looked up. The first thing I noticed was the silence. People nearby had stopped walking. A businessman standing at a crosswalk suddenly became very interested in his phone. A woman under a red umbrella took 2 quick steps backward. It was as if everyone knew something I did not. Then I saw the man's face. Sharp jawline. Dark hair. Cold gray-blue eyes. Sebastian Moretti. Even I recognized him. Everyone in New York recognized him. He owned buildings, companies, charities, and enough influence to make headlines whenever he walked into a room. Rumors followed him everywhere. Some people admired him. Some feared him. Most did both. Behind him stood 2 men in dark coats. They immediately moved forward. Not aggressively. Just protectively. The way people moved around someone important. My stomach tightened. I knew I should apologize. That was what any reasonable person would do. But before I could say anything, one of the men looked at me as if I had committed a terrible crime. The expression annoyed me more than it should have. It was just coffee. An accident. Suddenly, I felt something unexpected rise inside me. Not fear. Frustration. I was tired of people with money acting as though everyone else should tremble in their presence. Sebastian stared at me without speaking. Waiting. The rain continued falling around us. Water dripped from my hair. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. Then I lifted my chin and looked directly into his eyes. I am not afraid of you. The words escaped before I could stop them. Silence. Complete silence. Even the city seemed quieter. One of the men behind Sebastian looked shocked. A couple standing near a storefront froze mid-conversation. I immediately wondered if I had just ruined my life. Sebastian did not react. He simply stared at me. His expression unreadable. Seconds passed. Then something strange happened. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. More like curiosity. As though I had become the most interesting thing he had seen all day. No, he said quietly. I do not think you are. And for reasons I could not explain, that answer felt far more dangerous than anger ever would have. Most people would have apologized and walked away. I should have done the same. Instead, I stood there in the rain staring at Sebastian Moretti while every person on the sidewalk pretended not to watch. My pulse hammered against my ribs. The sensible part of my brain was screaming at me to leave. Yet my feet refused to move. Sebastian glanced down at the coffee stain on his suit and then back at me. His expression remained calm. That was somehow worse than anger. Angry people were predictable. Calm people were not. One of the men standing behind him stepped forward. Miss, I think it would be best if you. Sebastian raised a hand slightly. The man stopped talking immediately. The silence that followed felt heavy. The rain tapped against umbrellas. Traffic rolled past. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed through Manhattan. Finally, Sebastian spoke. What is your name? The question caught me off guard. Why? His eyebrow lifted. Most people answer simple questions. I crossed my arms. Most people are afraid of you. For a brief second, I thought I saw amusement flicker in his eyes. Then it vanished. And you were different? I shrugged. I am tired. That answer seemed to surprise him more than anything else. The truth was embarrassingly simple. I worked 2 jobs. I barely slept. My rent was due in 6 days. Fear required energy, and I did not have much left. Sebastian studied me as if trying to understand something. Then a black SUV pulled up beside the curb. The rear door opened. Clearly, his schedule expected him somewhere important. One of his assistants checked a watch nervously. Sir, the meeting. Sebastian ignored him. His attention remained on me. You ruined a very expensive suit. I looked at the stain. Then send me a bill. One of the assistants actually laughed before quickly hiding it. Sebastian noticed. So did I. The moment felt strangely human. Unexpectedly normal. Then he nodded once. What do you do? Why do you care? Humor me. I hesitated. I work at a community kitchen. And a bookstore. His eyes narrowed slightly. Not in judgment. In curiosity. 2 jobs. Some of us do not own half of New York. Another faint smile touched his face. This time I was certain I saw it. The rain continued falling between us. Finally, Sebastian stepped toward the SUV. Relief immediately washed through me. Whatever strange encounter this had been, it was finally over. Or so I thought. Sebastian paused before entering the vehicle. You never answered my question. I frowned. What question? His gray-blue eyes met mine one last time. Your name. For reasons I could not explain, I answered. Emily Carter. He repeated it quietly, as though committing it to memory. Then he entered the SUV and disappeared into Manhattan traffic. I stood there for several seconds watching the taillights fade into the rain. Later that night, I convinced myself I would never see Sebastian Moretti again. Across the city, Sebastian sat alone in the back of the SUV while the rain streaked across the windows. His assistant handed him a folder containing reports for tomorrow's meetings. Sebastian never opened it. Instead, he looked out at the city lights and asked a question that immediately changed both of our lives. Find out everything about Emily Carter. The next morning, my alarm went off at 5:30 just like it always did. No luxury penthouse. No personal assistant. No driver waiting downstairs. Just a tiny apartment, a coffee maker that worked when it felt like it, and another long day ahead of me. By 6:30, I was already helping unload food donations at the community kitchen. The air smelled like fresh bread and strong coffee. Volunteers moved around carrying boxes while regular guests slowly arrived for breakfast. Most of them knew me by name. That was one of my favorite things about the place. Nobody cared how much money you had. Nobody cared what neighborhood you lived in. People simply helped each other. Meanwhile, across Manhattan, Sebastian Moretti sat inside a glass office overlooking the city. A thick folder rested on his desk. My folder. According to the report, I lived alone. I worked 2 jobs. I had no wealthy relatives, no political connections, and no hidden source of money. Nothing about my life looked remarkable on paper. Yet Sebastian kept reading. Then reading again. Something did not make sense to him. Most people struggling to pay rent spend every dollar on themselves. Somehow I kept giving mine away. Around noon, a man named Walter arrived at the community kitchen. He was nearly 70 and lived alone a few blocks away. His coat was worn thin. One sleeve had been repaired so many times it barely matched the original fabric. I noticed him counting coins beside the serving line. He looked embarrassed. "Walter," I said, walking over. "Lunch is covered today." His shoulders relaxed immediately. "You do not have to do that, Emily." "I know." I smiled. "But I want to." He thanked me 3 times before sitting down. Moments later, I slipped a $20 bill into the donation jar near the register. It was money I probably needed myself. I did not think anyone noticed. I was wrong. Parked across the street sat a black SUV. Sebastian watched everything through the window. No cameras. No reporters. No audience. Just quiet observation. He watched me help elderly guests carry groceries. He watched me clean tables after everyone else left. He watched me laugh with volunteers and somehow remain cheerful despite working since dawn. For reasons he could not explain, the sight bothered him. Not because he disliked it. Because he did not understand it. Late that afternoon, I finished my shift and headed toward the bookstore where I worked evenings. As I passed a small playground, I noticed a little girl crying near a bench. Her mother looked exhausted. The child's balloon had escaped and disappeared into the sky. Without thinking, I stopped at a nearby vendor and bought another one. The smile that appeared on the little girl's face was worth every dollar. Across the street, Sebastian saw that too. He sat silently for several moments after I walked away. Then he looked at his assistant and asked a question nobody expected. "When was the last time I did something for someone who could not help me in return?" Some lessons cost money. The most important ones usually do not. I did not know Sebastian Moretti was about to learn that the hard way. 3 days passed after the afternoon at the playground. 3 ordinary days for me. 3 very unusual days for him. My routine never changed. Community kitchen in the morning. Bookstore in the evening. Sleep whenever I could. Repeat. Life was simple. Difficult sometimes. But simple. On Thursday afternoon, a black SUV stopped outside the bookstore. I noticed it through the front window while organizing a display of used novels. My first thought was that someone was lost. My second thought arrived when Sebastian stepped out. Several customers immediately recognized him. Conversations grew quieter. Heads turned. The same thing always happened whenever powerful people entered ordinary spaces. Attention followed them like a shadow. Sebastian walked through the front door and looked completely out of place among the crowded bookshelves and worn wooden floors. Yet somehow he seemed comfortable. "Can I help you find something?" I asked. His gray-blue eyes met mine. "Maybe." I already disliked that answer. "What are you doing here?" He glanced around the store. "Buying a book." "You have assistants for that." A faint smile appeared. "You seem determined to make every conversation difficult. You seem determined to keep showing up." Several customers pretended to browse nearby while clearly listening. Sebastian noticed. So did I. The situation felt ridiculous. Finally, he picked up a book from a display table. "What would you recommend?" I blinked. For what? Someone trying to understand people. The question surprised me. More than I wanted to admit. He sounded sincere. Not sarcastic. Not arrogant. Sincere. I studied him for a moment before selecting a worn paperback from the shelf behind me. "This one." Sebastian examined the cover. "Why?" I returned to sorting books. "Because the main character spends most of the story thinking money can solve everything." Silence followed. Then Sebastian laughed softly. The sound caught me off guard. It was not the laugh of a powerful businessman. It was the laugh of a man who had just realized he was being teased. He purchased the book without another question. I assumed that would be the end of the visit. I was wrong. The following morning, a delivery truck arrived at the community kitchen. Volunteers gathered outside in confusion. Nobody had ordered anything. Large boxes filled with fresh produce, bread, canned goods, and kitchen supplies were unloaded one after another. Enough to support the program for months. A small envelope sat on top of the final crate. My heart immediately suspected the sender. Inside was a handwritten note. No signature. No company logo. Just a single sentence. "Trying something different." I stared at the note for several seconds. Around me, volunteers celebrated the unexpected donation. Guests smiled. Staff members looked relieved. Yet my attention remained fixed on those 3 words. Because for the first time, Sebastian Moretti had done something without expecting recognition. Without cameras. Without headlines. Without applause. Later that evening, as city lights reflected across rain-soaked streets, Sebastian sat alone in his penthouse reading the book I had recommended. Halfway through the first chapter, he stopped and stared out at the skyline. Then he quietly repeated a sentence I had once said to him. "People need kindness more than fear." And for the first time in many years, he began wondering if I was right. The moment people stop questioning themselves is the moment they stop changing. Sebastian Moretti was beginning to learn that. A week passed after the donation arrived at the community kitchen. Life continued moving at its usual speed for me. Early mornings. Long shifts. Late nights at the bookstore. Bills that never seemed to get smaller. Yet something felt different. Not in my life. In his. I noticed it the next time Sebastian appeared. It was a rainy evening, and the bookstore was unusually quiet. Soft jazz played through the speakers. Water streaked across the front windows while customers browsed the shelves. I was restocking a section near the back when I saw him. He stood alone between 2 tall bookcases holding the paperback I had recommended. The same copy. The pages were worn now. "Read more than once." "You actually finished it," I said before I could stop myself. Sebastian looked up. "Twice." I stared at him suspiciously. "Are you trying to impress me?" A faint smile appeared. "Is it working?" "Not even a little." His smile widened slightly. The reaction surprised both of us. For a moment, he looked less like one of the most powerful men in New York and more like a normal person having a conversation. Then his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. Whatever message appeared erased the smile immediately. His shoulders tensed. His expression hardened. The change happened so quickly it was almost unsettling. Bad news? I asked. Sebastian slipped the phone into his pocket. A problem at work. The kind money solves? He looked at me for several seconds before answering. Usually. Usually. Not always. That single word stayed with me. Because for the first time, he sounded uncertain. Later that night, after closing the bookstore, I walked home through cold rain and glowing street lights. Across the city, Sebastian sat inside a conference room overlooking Manhattan. Executives filled the table. Lawyers reviewed documents. Advisors argued over numbers. A major development project had collapsed unexpectedly. Hundreds of workers faced layoffs. Millions of dollars were at risk. The room focused on profits. Contracts. Public image. Nobody mentioned the people whose lives would be affected. Then Sebastian remembered something. A community kitchen. A worn coat. A little girl with a replacement balloon. People need kindness more than fear. The thought refused to leave him. What happens to the workers? He suddenly asked. The room fell silent. Several executives exchanged confused looks. One finally answered. They will find other opportunities. Sebastian knew that was not true. Not for all of them. For the first time, he saw the situation differently. Not as numbers on paper. As people. Real people. The meeting continued for hours. Arguments grew louder. Opinions collided. Yet when the night ended, Sebastian made a decision nobody expected. A decision that would cost him millions of dollars. And the next morning, as I poured coffee for guests at the community kitchen, I had absolutely no idea that somewhere across the city, Sebastian Moretti had just chosen people over profit for the very first time in his life. People reveal who they truly are when they have something to lose. The strange thing was that Sebastian Moretti seemed willing to lose more with each passing day. I did not know about the decision he had made in that conference room. I did not know he had argued against advisors, ignored financial recommendations, and chosen a path that would cost him millions. All I knew was that something about him felt different. The change became impossible to ignore 2 weeks later. It started with a newspaper article. I was sitting at a small table during my lunch break at the community kitchen when one of the volunteers dropped a newspaper beside my coffee. Have you seen this? She asked. I glanced down. Sebastian's photograph covered half the page. Normally, I would have ignored it. Instead, a headline caught my attention. His company had announced a new plan that would protect hundreds of jobs connected to the failed development project. Financial analysts were criticizing the decision. Investors were unhappy. Yet the article quoted workers who were relieved they could continue supporting their families. I read the article twice. Then I folded it and slipped it into my bag without understanding why. That evening, the bookstore was unusually busy. Rain had driven people indoors, and every corner seemed occupied. I was helping a customer find a novel when the front door opened. I looked up and immediately saw him. Sebastian stepped inside carrying an umbrella and wearing a dark charcoal coat instead of his usual suit jacket. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he noticed the newspaper sticking out of my bag. His eyes narrowed slightly. You read it? It was not a question. I nodded. You lost a lot of money. A few nearby customers pretended not to listen. Sebastian glanced toward a shelf before answering. Money comes back. And the jobs? His expression softened. Not always. The answer surprised me. Because it sounded like something I would say. Not something he would. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The bookstore lights reflected softly across the rain-covered windows. Outside, New York rushed past. Inside, everything felt strangely quiet. Why did you really do it? I finally asked. Sebastian looked at me for a long moment. Because I kept thinking about something. What? A faint smile appeared. Someone once told me that people need kindness more than fear. My heart skipped unexpectedly. I looked away first. It felt safer that way. Then a customer approached with a stack of books, forcing the conversation to end. When I looked back a minute later, Sebastian was already heading toward the door. That is it? I called after him. He paused. What? You came all the way here just to buy another book? His smile returned. Genuine this time. No. I frowned. Then why? He opened the door and cool rain-scented air drifted inside. I wanted to see whether you would be disappointed in me. Before I could answer, he stepped outside and disappeared into the crowd. And standing there beneath the warm bookstore lights, I realized something that unsettled me far more than any display of power ever had. Sebastian Moretti no longer cared whether people feared him. He cared what I thought. The hardest truths are usually the ones we refuse to see about ourselves. For days after that conversation in the bookstore, I tried convincing myself that nothing had changed. Sebastian was still Sebastian. I was still me. Our lives belonged in completely different worlds. Yet every time I walked past a newspaper stand, I found myself searching for headlines about him. Every time my phone buzzed, a small part of me wondered if it was him. The realization irritated me. I had spent years building a practical life. There was no room in it for complicated feelings about powerful men in expensive suits. Unfortunately, reality seemed determined to disagree. One Saturday afternoon, the community kitchen hosted a neighborhood event. Families filled the sidewalk outside. Children painted signs. Volunteers served food beneath bright tents. The atmosphere felt warm despite the cool autumn air. I was carrying a box of supplies when I noticed a familiar black SUV parked across the street. My first reaction was disbelief. My second was annoyance. Sure enough, a few moments later, Sebastian stepped out. He was dressed casually by his standards, wearing a dark coat and simple sweater instead of a tailored suit. Several people recognized him immediately. Whispers spread through the crowd. Yet he ignored the attention and walked directly toward me. What are you doing here? I asked. Helping. I stared at him. Helping? That is what people do at community events, right? The answer was so unexpectedly sincere that I almost laughed. Before I could respond, one of the organizers approached carrying a stack of folding chairs. Within minutes, Sebastian found himself carrying tables, unloading supplies, and helping set up equipment. To my complete shock, he never complained. The afternoon passed quickly. Families enjoyed the event. Children played games. Volunteers shared meals. Every so often, I caught Sebastian watching people instead of checking his phone. Watching parents laugh with their children. Watching neighbors help one another. Watching ordinary moments most powerful men never slowed down long enough to notice. Late in the afternoon, an elderly volunteer named Martha approached him. Thank you for helping today, dear. Sebastian looked genuinely surprised. I did not do much. Martha smiled warmly. That is not true. You showed up. The simple words seemed to affect him more than any business award ever could. As the sun began setting, golden light washed across the street. Volunteers started cleaning up. I found Sebastian stacking chairs beside the community center wall. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked at me and asked a question so quietly I almost missed it. Do you really think people can change? I studied him carefully. The city noise faded into the background. Cars passed. Leaves drifted across the sidewalk. Somewhere nearby, children laughed. Yes, I said finally. But only when they stop changing for appearances and start changing for the right reasons. Sebastian held my gaze for several seconds. Then he nodded once. And in that moment, I realized something that left me completely unsettled. He was not changing because of me anymore. He was changing because he wanted to become someone he could respect. Sometimes the most important conversations happen when there is nothing left to prove. After the community event, I could not stop thinking about Sebastian's question. Do people really change? A few months earlier, I would have answered without hesitation. Now the answer felt more complicated. Because I had watched someone transform right in front of me. Not perfectly. Not overnight. But genuinely. The following week brought the first cold winds of winter. Gray clouds hung over Manhattan, and people hurried through the streets with their coats pulled tight. I was finishing my evening shift at the bookstore when the lights flickered unexpectedly. A storm was moving into the city. Most customers had already left. Only a handful remained browsing quietly between the shelves. I was locking a display case when the front door opened. I looked up and immediately saw Sebastian. This time he did not seem confident or composed. He looked tired. Not physically tired. Emotionally tired. As though he had been carrying something heavy for a very long time. He walked toward me and stopped beside a shelf of novels. Neither of us spoke at first. The storm rattled softly against the windows. Finally, I broke the silence. You look like someone who lost an argument. A faint smile appeared. Several of them. I leaned against the counter. Bad day? He exhaled slowly. Complicated day. Something in his voice told me this was different. So I waited. After a moment, he looked around the nearly empty bookstore before speaking again. Do you know what surprises me most? I shook my head. The fact that none of this was part of my plan. I laughed softly. Most good things are not. Sebastian looked down for a second. Then back at me. His gray-blue eyes seemed unusually honest. Unprotected. For years, everyone around me wanted something. The words came quietly. Money. Influence. Opportunities. Favors. They always saw what I could give them. The storm grew louder outside. Neither of us noticed. And you? I asked. He smiled without humor. You spilled coffee on me. Despite myself, I laughed. The sound echoed through the bookstore. For a moment, even Sebastian laughed. Then his expression became serious again. You were the first person who looked at me like I was just another human being. The words settled between us. Simple. Honest. Real. My heart tightened unexpectedly. Because I knew how difficult that admission must have been for him. That should not be rare, I said quietly. Maybe not. He nodded. But it was. Outside, snowflakes began mixing with the rain. The city lights blurred against the glass. Sebastian studied me for several seconds before speaking one last time. You changed something, Emily. I opened my mouth to disagree. He gently shook his head. No. You did. His voice remained calm. Certain. You reminded me of the person I wanted to be before I forgot. And standing there beneath the warm bookstore lights while winter arrived outside, I realized this was the first truly honest conversation either of us had ever had. The day people stopped fearing Sebastian Moretti did not arrive with headlines or celebrations. It arrived quietly, the way most meaningful changes do. A month after our conversation in the bookstore, winter settled over New York. Snow covered rooftops. Store windows glowed warmly against the cold. Life continued moving forward, yet something had shifted beneath the surface. The community kitchen had more resources than ever before. Local programs received support. Families who once worried about losing jobs were finding stability again. Nobody connected those changes to Sebastian. Most of the help came anonymously. That was exactly how he wanted it. One snowy evening, I finished my shift and stepped outside into the cold air. The city looked almost peaceful. Streetlights reflected across fresh snow. cars moved slowly through the evening traffic. As I adjusted my scarf, I noticed a familiar black SUV parked across the street. For some reason, seeing it made me smile. Sebastian stood beside it, hands in his coat pockets, snowflakes settling on his dark hair. "You know," I said as I walked closer, "most people call before showing up." A faint smile appeared. "I am working on that." We started walking without deciding where to go. The city stretched around us in 1,000 lights. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. The silence felt comfortable. Honest. Finally, I looked at him. "Do you ever miss it?" Sebastian frowned slightly. "Miss what?" "The fear. The control. Having everyone do exactly what you wanted." He considered the question carefully. A few months earlier, I already knew what his answer would have been. Now I was not so sure. Snow drifted through the glow of nearby streetlights. Sebastian looked out at the city before speaking. "I thought I would." His voice was calm. Thoughtful. "For a long time I believed respect and fear were the same thing." I listened quietly. "But they are not." He shook his head. "Not even close." We continued walking. Ahead of us, a father lifted his young daughter onto his shoulders so she could reach a low-hanging branch covered with snow. The little girl laughed. The sound echoed through the cold evening air. Sebastian watched them for a moment before turning back to me. "The strange thing is that I have never felt more respected than I do now." My heart tightened. Not because of what he said. Because I knew he meant it. We stopped beside a small park decorated with winter lights. Snowflakes drifted around us. For a moment, the city seemed far away. "You changed your life," I said quietly. Sebastian smiled and looked toward the sky. "No." Then his gray-blue eyes met mine. The same eyes that had once seemed distant and impossible to read. Now they looked different. Lighter somehow. Human. I remembered who I was supposed to be. Neither of us spoke after that. We did not need to. Because the truth was standing right there between us. The most powerful man in the city had spent years teaching people to fear him. Yet the thing that changed his life was not power, money, or influence. It was a poor girl who looked him in the eye on a rainy afternoon and refused to be afraid. And in the end, that mattered more than everything else.